Hey, welcome back. Did you ever, as a kid, try and sneak out at night and then you stuffed some pillows and things underneath the covers on your bed? So that way, if somebody looks in, then they would see the bulge under the blanket and they'd think that you were sleeping there all along. Those pillows underneath the blankets were supposed to stand in for you, to represent you. Now, your parents were probably smarter than that, and so they figured it out and you got caught. But here in our passage today, God creates a representative of himself when he creates mankind in his own image. So go ahead and pause the video and go read Genesis 1 verse 26 down through chapter 2 verse 3. And then we'll pick it up right where we left off last time. In verses 26 and 27 of Genesis chapter 1, we see the climactic finale of God's creative activity, the creation of mankind. Let us make man in our own image, after our likeness. Now, wait a second here. Us? Our? Who's God talking to? What do we do with these plural pronouns here? Look, theologians and Bible scholars have been wrestling with this question for centuries, so don't think that I'm going to be the one to give you some definitive answer here. But do let us run through some of the suggestions. 1. The Trinity. There are 3 persons within the triune Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. 3 in 1. So basically in this view, the Father is conversing with the Son and the Spirit, saying, let us make man in our image. The problem with that is that Judaism really had no concept of a Trinity. In fact, one of the most basic tenets of Judaism is that there is only one God. Jesus himself got killed for claiming to be one with God. So, seeing a Trinitarian reference here seems more like reading that back into the text rather than drawing out what's actually there. 2. Angels. Another common view is that God is speaking to angels in heaven. There are other passages in the Old Testament where God is conversing with spiritual beings, and also other passages that refer to what's called a council of God. But the problem here is that mankind is not made in the image of angels. And the 3 verbs that are used for created in verse 27 are in the singular, not the plural. 3. The majestic plural. The majestic plural is a way of speaking that uses plural pronouns to refer to a singular person. It is often used to signify honor and greatness and majesty. In other words, maybe this is just a figure of speech used to emphasize God's greatness and his majesty. The divine name itself, Elohim, has a plural ending. And there are also other examples in the Old Testament where singular people and things are referred to using plural pronouns. So to me, this seems to be the most reasonable view. Verse 27. So God created man in his own image, the Hebrew tselem. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. All the other living beings were made according to their kinds. But here we have the one exception. Mankind made in the image and likeness of God. Being made in the image of God is what sets us apart from any other being in creation. We are not simply the most evolved animal. So what exactly does it mean to be made in the image of God? Well, to tell the truth, the Bible doesn't actually give us an explicit definition. We try to look at the grammar and how those words are used elsewhere and the surrounding context to try and figure that out. So, again, centuries of Bible scholars, many different views. By now you know the drill. Number 1, physical resemblance. This view would suggest that human beings resemble God in his physical likeness. In other words, we look like him. This is based on the word usage. That Hebrew word for image, tselem, is most commonly used of a physical image, like a statue or an idol. However, God is spirit. John 4:24. He's invisible, Colossians 1:15. He doesn't have a physical image, Deuteronomy 4:12. So number 2, immaterial qualities. Now these kinds of views would suggest that rather than physical likeness, we're actually like God in more of his abstract qualities, such as intellect or consciousness, morality or free will, or the ability to have a spiritual relationship. But the fact that they can't even agree on a list of what those qualities actually are kind of casts some doubt on this view. Additionally, that word selim really does primarily refer to the product of the image and not just some ability or quality about that thing. Third, we'll call this one social relationship. These views tend to place the emphasis on the third phrase in that verse, male and female, he created them. God himself is a social being, as we see within the Trinity. And so therefore, the image of God in mankind is said to be the two genders, enabling us to have communion together. Now, props to them for looking at the literary context. But the image is something that every individual human has. In other words, the image exists independent of gender. Also, that seems to go a little bit beyond the text. That phrase about male and female simply shows how we were made in God's image. That is, that the image of God is equally in both genders. And then 4, functional rulership. This set of views focuses on verse 28, where God commands mankind to have dominion over the creation, to fill the earth and subdue it. In other words, the image of God is basically acting as his vice ruler on earth. Now, while that function is true, this view doesn't seem to go quite far enough. They focus on the role of the image bearer rather than the actual image itself. And that doesn't seem to take seriously enough the physical nature of this word selim. Okay, so what should we make of this? Well, let's make a few observations. The Hebrew preposition used here, bet, is ordinarily translated in. That's why they put here, in the image of God. However, it can also be used indicating the capacity in which something exists or functions. For example, in Exodus 18:4, Moses says, "The God of my father was, bet, my help." In other words, God acted in the capacity of Moses' helper. So if that's the way that it's being used here, then perhaps it could be more accurately translated as, or in the capacity of. In other words, mankind is created as the image of God. As one commentator writes, the image of God is not a quality within human beings, it's what humans are. Another observation. As we've been saying, this word selim primarily refers to a physical thing. This is the same word used in Daniel chapter 3 verse 1 when Nebuchadnezzar creates an image or a statue of himself and sets it up so that all of his subjects would bow down to it. Now, the statue represents the king and his sovereign rulership over these newly conquered lands. So while we wouldn't say that we carry a physical resemblance to God, we are the physical representation of the invisible God here on the earth. In other words, we are his image, representing him in the creation. This representation certainly carries the function of servant rulership, those commands to fill, subdue, and have dominion. But it also includes the idea of demonstrating God to the creation. We already mentioned earlier our purpose of glorifying God. But this is actually built into who we are as image bearers. We are to represent and display God's glory. We're to mirror what God is like to the rest of the world. Another observation. In the ancient Near East, kings were often referred to as the image of, or the living statue of, this or that particular pagan god. And this goes right along with the understanding of that king as a son of the gods. This language of image and likeness comes up again in the genealogy in Genesis chapter 5. It starts with God making Adam in the likeness of God, Luke 3:38 then calls Adam a son of God. Then in verse 3, Adam fathered a son in his own likeness, after his own image. So it seems like this idea of being an image bearer is closely related to the idea of sonship. You know how sometimes a kid resembles their parents? Somebody might see them around town and say, "Oh, you look just like your father." But also how that child behaves reflects on the family. Because in public, they're representing the family. They carry the family name. Well, similarly, this image-bearing sonship also ties back to the idea of representing God. Israel would later be called God's firstborn son. They were supposed to be a light to the nations, demonstrating God to the rest of the world. God would also take the Davidic king, the representative ruler of Israel, to be his son. And then into the New Testament, the new covenant community is also said to be adopted as God's children. So, mankind is the image of God, representing him to the rest of creation. But Genesis 3 happens. Sin comes into the world, and now our ability to represent and image God in the world has been corrupted. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not in the image of God anymore. We absolutely are. Multiple verses affirm that even fallen mankind is still the image of God. Only now we're imperfect representations, corrupted by sin. But as we look into the New Testament, we see Jesus described as the image of God. Colossians 1 verse 15, Jesus himself said, "Whoever has seen me has seen the Father." Jesus is the ultimate image bearer because he literally is God in the flesh. Hebrews 1 verse 3 says, "He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature." He is the ultimate Son of God. He is the King of the new covenant. There could be no better representation of God on earth. He fulfills what the image bearer should be. So now, our ability to image God is fulfilled through being in Christ, the perfect image bearer, rather than being in Adam, the fallen image bearer. In Christ, we are described as new creations. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Our new self is created according to the likeness of God, Ephesians 4:24. But it's also being transformed more and more into the image of Christ, Romans 8:29, Colossians 3:10. Thus, it's allowing us to better fulfill our purpose as image bearers. Awesome. Let's keep going. So mankind is created as the image of God, representing God to the creation. And as such, he is also to imitate God in his actions. In verse 28, God commanded them, "Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over every living thing." So they are to, 1, subdue and rule and have dominion over the earth, and 2, they are to fruitfully multiply and fill the earth. Now, do you remember how during the first 3 days of creation, God was bringing order out of chaos? He was taking care of the tohu, the wildness. As he does this, he creatively invents names for the things that he created. He called the light day. He called the darkness night. Well, in ancient Near Eastern cultures, to name something means to have rulership over it. In chapter 2, verses 19 and 20, we see Adam doing the same thing. He is naming the animals. This is to demonstrate man's rule and authority over them. Later on, God puts Adam in the Garden of Eden to work and to keep it. That is, cultivating and showing dominion over the plant life. So in this way, mankind is following the divine paradigm or pattern, ruling over the earth, taking care of the tohu. Then, during the next 3 days, God was filling creation. He was taking care of the bohu, the emptiness. Again, mankind was to imitate God by producing offspring and filling the earth with more image bearers. Also, serving as gardeners and cultivating the plants, they would fill the earth with produce. And in this way, they were again fulfilling the divine paradigm, taking care of the bohu. Remember how at the end of each day, God pronounced his creation as good? Well, here, at the very end of the 6th day, God surveyed his entire creation and pronounced that it was all very good. A little change up with the superlative there. It was to show that the entirety of God's creation altogether was completed perfectly, exactly how God wanted it to be. While the creation of mankind was the climax of God's creative activity, it's not the end of the creation account. Or we could say the consummation. Consummation simply means the fulfillment or completion or culmination. No, it's actually the 7th day that is the grand finale that everything has been working toward. Now here on the 7th day, we see a huge contrast from all the other days. That whole repetition from all of the previous 6 days isn't here. God doesn't speak. God doesn't make or form. Instead, 3 times it says that he finished his work. And twice it says that he rested. Why does God rest? I mean, he is all-powerful, isn't he? Well, clearly, this is not because he is tired or weary. And it doesn't mean that he's stopped working altogether. What we see in this passage is the rest of achievement or completion. He has completed his creative work. But why a 7th day in the first place? I mean, if the purpose of this account was to describe the origins of the universe, then couldn't he have just finished up after 6 days? Why is the consummation of this account a day of rest? You see, this 7th day of rest, it's not just a nice way to wrap up the end of a long week. I propose that rest is the consummation of the creation account because rest is the consummation of all things. It's what all creation is working towards. This idea of rest is a leading theme that can be traced all the way through the Bible. Right here, at the original creation, there is rest. But then sin enters the world in Genesis chapter 3, and both man and woman are punished with painful labor. There's no longer rest. Lamech named his son Noah, which sounds like the Hebrew word for rest, because he hoped that Noah would bring rest from mankind's toiling and working of the cursed ground. Later on, Israel found themselves in slave labor in Egypt without rest. But God delivered them and promised to bring them to a land of rest. The Mosaic Law described how they were to live in that land, including many references to rest. The Sabbath was one of the 10 Commandments, ensuring that there would be 1 day of rest out of the week. Various Jewish holidays and festivals included special days of rest. Every 7th year, they were supposed to not plant crops so that the land could rest. Then, after Joshua's conquest, Israel finally found rest, dwelling peacefully in the Promised Land. This rest in God's Promised Land reminds us of pre-fall Eden. However, this still was not the ultimate rest, but only a foreshadowing. Because eventually Israel rebelled against God and they were punished and sent into exile out of the land. But even then, the prophets encouraged them with predictions of restoration and that one day a Messiah would come and bring them rest. Then Jesus, the Messiah, did come and brought them the offer of rest. Although not the kind that they expected, he offered a spiritual rest. But ultimately, every one of those rests foreshadows and points us forward to the day when we will enter into God's eternal rest in the new creation. So the creation account actually lays out a paradigm or a pattern for all of history. It's a little microcosm of salvation history. The ultimate goal is rest. So even now, God is busy working, bringing order out of the chaos brought about by sin and filling the earth with His glory. He is graciously redeeming a people for Himself who will image Him through their increasing Christ-likeness. And then at the consummation, the end of all of salvation history will be rest. Rest from painful labor. Rest from struggle against the enemies of Satan, sin, and death. Rest in complete peace and enjoyment of God, the ultimate end and consummation that everything is working towards is rest. So this rest is like a grand inclusio, two bookends of the entire story. It's where we began, and it's where we will come to again in the end. So here we've seen God's purpose and plan for all things, and for you. He's made you as His image, and He's put you here to glorify Him and to represent Him to the world. So as long as we live here in this fallen world, joyfully looking forward to that ultimate day of rest, may I encourage you with the words of Jesus to His disciples. Let your light so shine before others that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven.